So have you ever really thought about the very first crime? And I'm not talking about on Earth. I mean the first crime in the entire cosmos. Today, we're going to try and solve a puzzle that stretches back before humanity, even before the Garden of Eden, to the very nature of sin, and a law that might just be older than time itself. All right, let's get into it. Here's our game plan. Our investigation is going to start with one single critical piece of evidence: what sin actually is. From there, we'll follow the trail of clues, run a little thought experiment, and see how it all points to a foundational principle of the entire cosmos. You know, every good investigation needs a solid place to start, a fact you can build everything else on. For us, that's getting a really clear, unshakable definition of what it means to sin. And here's our first clue, straight from the source material. It's a powerful and, honestly, a pretty simple equation. Sin is breaking the law. It's lawlessness, plain and simple. This definition right here is the key that's going to unlock this whole cosmic case. So let's keep it front and center in our minds. Okay, but here's the thing. That simple definition, it immediately creates a huge question, a real puzzle that takes us way back to the very beginning of everything, involving angels and that first great rebellion. This right here, this is the central mystery we have to solve, because the answer to this question changes everything. Was Satan's rebellion a cosmic crime against a law that already existed? Or was it just, a choice made in a universe that didn't have any rules yet? The timing is absolutely critical. So let's do a little thought experiment. Just to see why the timing of this law is so important, let's imagine for a second a universe where the law, it just didn't exist yet. What would that even look like? What would be the consequences? Well, it leads to a really interesting paradox. In a world without law, there can't be any sin. Actions that we think of as, the very definition of evil, like tempting others or deceiving them, they wouldn't technically be wrong. They'd just be actions with no moral yardstick to measure them against. Okay, so if we just go with that idea for a minute, no law means no sin. Let's follow that chain of logic and see where it takes us. The first piece to fall is the idea of a standard. I mean, it makes sense, right? Without a standard to break, well, breaking it is impossible. It's simple logic. If there's no speed limit posted on a road, you can't technically be speeding. If a game has no rules, you can't be a rule breaker. And that leads us to the next logical step. If there's no cosmic rulebook, no standard that clearly defines what's right and what's wrong, then sin itself cannot exist. It becomes a logical impossibility. And see, this is the dead end our thought experiment leads to, a universe where even Satan's rebellion wasn't actually a sin. But does that really feel right? Does that square with the evidence we have? Yeah, that conclusion just doesn't sit right, does it? So let's step away from our thought experiment for a minute and look at the hard evidence, the facts presented in the source material. And there it is, the one piece of hard evidence that just completely shatters our little thought experiment, because the record is crystal clear. A judgment did happen. This verse is Exhibit A in our case. You can't have a judgment for sinning if sin isn't even a thing. This verse proves two things for us. One, angels sinned, and two, they were judged for it. And for any judgment to be fair and just, there has to have been a law to break in the first place.
So this forces our hand. We have to ask the next logical question. If they were judged against a law, what was the crime they committed, and what was the law they broke?
The source points us right here to this passage in Isaiah. The original crime, the one committed by the angel Hillel, who we later come to know as Satan, was an act of supreme pride. It was the desire to take God's place, to make himself like the Most High. That was the transgression. So let's just lay out the chain of logic so it's perfectly clear. A just judgment requires a law that already exists. We see from Scripture that Hillel was judged and imprisoned. We also know for a fact that this all happened before Adam was ever tempted in the garden. The conclusion, then, is inescapable. A law had to be in place at the time of Hillel's rebellion. We follow the evidence all the way from a simple definition to a conclusion we just can't get around. So, what does this all tell us about the very nature of God's law? What's the final verdict here? Just think about it for a second. If God made up a rule after Satan rebelled, just so he could punish him, that wouldn't be just. That would be arbitrary. It would mean God was just reacting, maybe even caught off guard. And that just doesn't fit with the idea of an all-knowing, perfectly just creator. Instead, the source argues the timeline looked more like this. Step 1. God decides to create beings with free will.
But for that free will to actually mean anything, for it to be a real choice between good and evil, obedience and rebellion, a standard of conduct has to already be there. The law had to come first.
And this brings us to the core insight, the real takeaway. The law wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't some emergency patch to fix the problem of sin. It was the fundamental operating system for a universe filled with beings who could choose. It was installed from the very beginning. And that leaves us with one last really powerful thought to chew on. If the ultimate law is just an expression of God's own nature, his character of love and justice, then it can't have a beginning. It has to be as eternal as God himself. The law didn't start with Moses or Adam or even the angels. The law simply is.